usual. But I think one of the more interesting things you're seeing at the moment, this most recent cabinet reshuffle on the part of Kishida, is he's in many ways completely, equalized the the Abe factor. Now, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the late Shinzo Abe, he is Kishida's basically political patron, his mentor, if you will. He was prime minister from 2012 until 2020. And basically, Kishida has now pretty much purged his cabinet of the Abe faction, which you can argue is freeing him up to be his own man, if you will, to take a variety of steps to maybe pivot in a different direction on the economy. Kishida's talked about implementing a new capitalism. Nobody knows what that is. I've been trying to figure out and understand what that means exactly. I'm not sure Kishida knows himself, but you can argue that now he doesn't have the Abe faction looking over his shoulder. He can actually pivot in a different direction. Whether that will happen is an open question. I think the biggest implications could be for the Bank of Japan, right? Because the Abe faction was very big on monetary easing. They were very big on the BOJ widening its balance sheet. And at the moment, the BOJ is looking at whether or not it can begin stepping away from 22 years of quantitative easing, whether it can begin tapering. And you can argue that with the Abe faction out of the way, perhaps Kishida will be a little more tolerant of the BOJ stepping away from quantitative easing. That said, Japan, as I said a moment ago, is pretty much in recession at the moment. Is this the right time for the BOJ to be pivoting away from QE? It's an open question.
Indeed, strange time to be trying to tighten monetary policy, right, for the first time in more than a decade.
It is.
But, you've got the BOJ coming up to about 18th, 19th, we know that. What I'm also curious about, Willie, is the linchpin. What's going to allow the BOJ to start exiting is going to be sustainable wage growth, right? And the last round of Shinto, I think for 2023, workers are on average going to get about 3.5% more or something like that, which, on the surface doesn't really sound like a lot. And then when you sort of do some simple back of the cocktail napkin math to it, considering, let's say, the average salary man, or average worker, rather, in Japan earns about $41,000 a year. You put 3.5% on top of that, and you break it down to a daily basis. That's the equivalent, roughly, of an extra bowl of ramen. How much is this really going to help, the average man?
Well, it won't help the average man. And the other problem that we're having here in Japan is that, so basically, okay, we're talking a 3.5% pay bump. That's fine. How about next year and the year after? Wages only matter in terms of, consumer psychology if they're maintained, if this is a continued trajectory towards higher wages. And the question is whether or not that can happen. If you are a Japanese company and you're looking at the fact Japan's in recession at the moment, you're looking at the fact that China is slowing and not being the growth engine that Japan needs, and you're looking at the fact that the government is not putting important reforms on the scoreboard, and that the BOJ may be tapering and that Japanese yields may be rising, do you really think that 2024 and 2025 will be a fertile environment for CEOs to fatten paychecks? Probably not. And this is something that weighs on consumer psychology. When you go out for a beer with the average Japanese, and I'm one of those people who walks around the bar and walks over to strangers and says, what do you think? And I just hear a lot of doom and gloom about 2, 3, 5, 10 years. I'm that guy, yeah. 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now, people are not that optimistic that wages will be growing next year and the year after. And that's really what matters if you want people to buy a flat, you want people to buy a car, you want people to upgrade their technology. That's the important thing. And we're not seeing efforts on the ground to maintain that wage growth. And again, inflation is rising in some ways at the highest rates in a couple of decades. You put it all together, and the Japanese are not feeling great about the economy heading into 2024. And Kishida's approval ratings are a very important manifestation of that disconnect.